This is something that has been in the works for quite some time. And throughout the years, it has always been that kind of situation where I know what to say. I just didn't know how to say it. But with that being said, it is now time. Welcome to the first episode of Soothing Sounds. Welcome to the first episode of the Soothing Sounds podcast. This is Cameron here, and I will be discussing, something that I have been exposed to that completely changed my life, of which I really do believe it can change yours too. But just before I get to it, I also just need to mention that with this podcast, this is not counseling, this is not me giving you advice. This podcast is my testimony. Now, it all started back in 2018, which was a completely different year for me. It was a disaster. That was a point in my life where I was so distracted. I was so overly focused on, what needs to be achieved, what needs to be obtained, the next bill that I need to pay, the next bag that I need to get, and so on and so forth. Without me even realizing, all the other elements that I am losing along the way, like friendships, relationships, time, simply due to me being absolutely consumed by the world, me being consumed by the flow of life, which ultimately compromised my mental capacity. Brief description: your mental capacity determines the level of comprehension of what you are going through, which we will discuss a lot more in depth in the next episode. And that's when it happened. That is when I was exposed to the burning sensation. That is when I was exposed to the fire of God. Now, there are many scriptures that explains this, that speaks about this. But the scripture that really caught my attention was, you will find it in Hebrews 12, where they explain it as, "For our God is a consuming fire." Now, this is what it was like going through the burning sensation. I remember there was 3 stages, that I went through. The first stage I like to call the filter stage, right? If you look at the vehicle, for example, there's a reason why a filter is crucial. Because the main responsibility of a filter is to prevent any form of impurities from entering the system, in order to allow the actual substance that is supposed to go through to flow through. Which was the same with my mind. Getting to that stage where, because of everything that I allowed, to go through my mind, getting to the point where my mind was full of impurities, which ultimately, negatively impacted my mental capacity, which negatively impacted my mental regulation. And then I got to that point where I then moved into the second stage of the burning sensation, which was the more darker stage. Now, because I was now already in this situation of having a clogged mental regulation, so to speak, based on my decision making that led me to this point, I couldn't move. But also the main reason why I couldn't move is because the burning sensation, the fire of God, didn't allow me to move. Now, this is the reason why this is called the dark stage. This is that point where the fire of God, the burning sensation, started to display its destructive nature. It started to display its wrath. That was the point where the burning sensation, the fire of God, entered my system and made decisions for me. I had one job and one job only, and that was to listen. I could not make decisions for myself during this stage unless I received an instruction from the fire of God. Once I move, burn. Once I make a decision for myself, burn. So at that point, I had no other choice but to surrender myself, to surrender my mind, to surrender my mental capacity, to surrender my filter, to surrender my mental regulation. I just had to surrender myself. Now, this was the point where things really became difficult because you develop that sense of helplessness. You develop that sense of hopelessness. You develop that sense of feeling like a failure. Let me tell you this quick story. I remember this one day, I'll never forget this day. I remember this one day where I just finished a shift and, my friends and myself, we just went downstairs and, spent time together, just to end of the night. And I remember sitting there and one of my friends, came over to me, saying their goodbyes and saying, "I'll see you tomorrow." And the only thing I thought to myself was, "No, you're not." The only thing that went through my mind at that specific moment in times was, and I'm going to put this very lightly, the only thing I was thinking to myself is, how can I intentionally discontinue the flow of my life? And then finally, moving over to the last stage, which was what I call the change of lens. After months of constant burning, that burning sensation, that fire, finally subsided. But the first thing I realized, once the fire subsided, I realized, how bruised I was. But then also realizing that everything is quiet. I could feel that my filter could breathe again. I was bruised, yet empty. It was such an odd feeling in that moment, thinking to myself, what I see, this is not me. What I think, this is not me. What I feel, it's not me. But it is. And that's when I realized, throughout the burning sensation was purely an opportunity for me to see everything that I'm going through his lens, not mine. And that's when I finally rejoiced. And I was at peace, finally realizing that going through life through his lens provides nothing but revival. And I couldn't see it, obviously, in that moment, I couldn't see it. All I had to do was just to simply listen. The burning sensation, the fire of God, showed me two things. Firstly, just because we have this thing called free will does not mean that we are in charge. That free will can be taken away from you, just like that. But then the second thing I realized about the burning sensation, about the fire of God, is that there are so many things out there that we can be exposed to, but we're not. There's a reason why God Himself doesn't allow everyone to go through the same thing. The main thing I always said going through this journey was, all I ask is for guidance. Show me the way, and I will listen.